The cake sat on my dining room table, white frosting gleaming under the light. My children stood around it, their faces carefully arranged into smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Sarah held the knife. David had his phone out, ready to take pictures. My grandchildren shuffled their feet and looked at the floor. "Make a wish, Mom," Sarah said, her voice bright and false. I leaned forward to read the words written in blue icing across the top. "See you later." Not happy birthday. Not we love you. Not even a simple number to mark my 74 years on this earth. Just those 3 words that felt like a door closing in my face. "It's a joke," David said quickly when he saw my expression. "You know, like, see you later, alligator. Remember when we used to say that?" But I knew it wasn't a joke. I could see it in the way they wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I could hear it in the silence that followed. This wasn't celebration. It was dismissal. They had decided I was finished, old, useless. This birthday party was their way of saying goodbye to the mother they no longer needed. That night, after they left and the house fell quiet, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at that cake, still whole because no one had really wanted to eat it. And something shifted inside me. Something hard and bright and fierce. If they thought I was done, then I would show them what done really meant. I would walk away from this life they decided was over. I would find out who I was when no one was watching, when no one was telling me to slow down or sit down, or let the younger people handle it. Within a week, I'd packed my things and moved to a small cottage by the lake, 2 hours away from the city where my children lived their busy lives. I didn't tell them I was leaving. I just went. The morning of my 74th birthday started like most mornings had for the past 5 years, quiet, predictable, and lonely. I woke up in the house my husband Frank and I had bought 40 years ago, the house where we'd raised our children, the house that felt too big now that I lived in it alone. Frank had been gone for 3 years. Cancer took him slowly, and I'd watched the man I loved fade away bit by bit until there was nothing left but memories and an empty chair at the dinner table. After he died, my children had been kind for a while. They called more often. They visited on weekends. They worried about me being alone. But kindness turned into something else over time. It turned into impatience when I couldn't figure out my new phone. It turned into frustration when I asked them to repeat things. It turned into embarrassment when I wore the wrong clothes to their fancy dinners or said something they thought was old-fashioned. "Mom, you need to keep up with the times," Sarah would say, her voice tight with irritation. "Maybe you should think about a retirement home," David suggested more than once. "Somewhere with people your own age. Activities planned for you. You have company." What they meant was, "You're in the way. You're a burden. We have our own lives now, and you don't fit into them anymore." I tried to be the mother they wanted. I tried to be quiet and agreeable and not ask for too much. I learned to lie when they asked how I was doing. "Fine," I'd say, even when I was so lonely I could barely breathe. "Everything's fine." So when they showed up on my birthday with that cake, I already knew something was wrong. They'd been too cheerful on the phone when they called to say they were coming. They'd insisted on bringing everything. The cake, the plates, even the forks. All I had to do was be there. I'd spend the morning cleaning the house and putting on my best dress. I'd even done my hair nicely, curling it the way Frank used to like. I was excited. Birthdays had been hard since Frank died, and having my family there felt like maybe things could be good again. But then I saw that cake. "See you later." I stood there looking at those words while my children sang happy birthday in voices that sounded hollow. While my grandchildren, Tyler, Emma, and little Sophia, watched me with eyes that held something I couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe. Or guilt. "Make a wish, Mom," Sarah said again, holding out the knife. I took it. The handle was cold in my hand. I looked around at my family, at these people I had carried in my body and raised and loved with everything I had. And I realized they were waiting for me to play along, to pretend this was normal, to accept my dismissal with grace. "What kind of cake is it?" I asked. "Vanilla," David said. "Your favorite." It wasn't my favorite. Chocolate was my favorite. But David had never paid much attention to details like that. I cut into the cake. The knife went through the frosting and into the soft white cake beneath. I put a slice on a plate and handed it to Sarah. She took it but didn't eat. None of them ate. They just stood there, waiting. "Why, see you later?" I asked finally. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Sarah and David looked at each other. Tyler studied his shoes. Emma picked at her fingernails. "It's just we thought." Sarah started, then stopped. "We're worried about you," David finished. "Living alone in this big house. No one to help if something happens. You're not getting any younger, Mom." "I'm 74, I said. "Not dead." "We know that. But you have to be realistic. You can't do the things you used to do. And we can't always be here to check on you. We have jobs, kids, responsibilities." There it was. The truth beneath the frosting. I was too much work. Too much worry. Too much responsibility for people who had their own lives to live. "So, see you later, means what exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though something was cracking inside my chest. "It means we'll visit when we can," Sarah said quickly. "It means we're not saying goodbye forever. Just that we need you to understand we can't be here all the time." "It means you should think about that retirement home I mentioned," David added. "Somewhere you'd have help. Care. People your own age." I looked at the cake again, at those 3 words that meant so much more than they said. This wasn't concern. This was abandonment dressed up as practicality. They wanted me tucked away somewhere convenient, somewhere they could visit twice a year, with a clear conscience. The party ended quickly after that. They ate their cake, or pretended to, and made excuses about traffic and early mornings. They hugged me on their way out, and those hugs felt like apologies for something they weren't sorry enough to not do. After they left, I sat alone in my too-big house with half a cake on the table and silence pressing in from all sides. I thought about Frank and how he would have been furious if he'd seen this. I thought about the years I'd spent raising these children, the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd given freely without expecting anything in return. And I thought about that cake. See you later. Fine. They wanted to see me later? They wanted me out of their way? I would show them what that looked like. I didn't cry. I didn't call them to argue or plead. Instead, I got up from that table and started planning. I'd seen an ad for a cottage by the lake, a small place that rented cheap because it needed work. It was 2 hours away from the city, far enough that my children couldn't just drop by to check on me, but close enough that I could drive if I needed to. Over the next week, I packed my clothes, my books, Frank's favorite chair, and the photo albums full of memories from when my children still knew how to love me. I hired movers to take the furniture I wanted and donated the rest. I didn't tell Sarah or David what I was doing. I just did it. The cottage was smaller than I expected, with peeling paint and floors that creaked when you walked on them. But it had windows that looked out over the lake and a porch where I could sit in the mornings with my coffee. It had a kitchen with old appliances and counter space where I could spread out. It had quiet, real quiet, not the heavy silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of a place where you could finally breathe. I moved in on a Tuesday. The mover set down my furniture and left, and I stood in the middle of my new living room feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the lake. I thought about Frank and how proud he would be that I'd walked away instead of letting them put me somewhere to fade away quietly. I thought about my children and whether they'd noticed yet that I was gone. Mostly, I thought about what came next. I was 74 years old, alone in a cottage by a lake, with no plan except to prove that my life wasn't over just because someone wrote those words on a cake. I didn't know yet about Nutri-Paste or the people who would come to my door or the movement that would start in my small kitchen. I didn't know that leaving would be the best decision I'd ever made. All I knew was that endings could become beginnings if you were brave enough to walk through the door. And I just walked through mine. The first few weeks in the cottage were harder than I expected. Not because I regretted leaving, I didn't, not for a second. But because I'd spent so many years being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's burden, that I didn't know how to just be myself anymore. I woke up early out of habit, even though no one needed breakfast made. I'd start to call Frank to ask if he wanted coffee before remembering he was gone. I'd reach for my phone to check if Sarah or David had messaged, then remember they didn't know where I was and probably hadn't noticed I'd left. The cottage needed work, but I liked that. I spent my days fixing what I could, patching holes in the walls, painting the kitchen cabinets a cheerful yellow, pulling weeds from the garden that previous tenants had abandoned. Physical work felt good. It made me tired in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with purpose. Money was tight. My pension covered rent and basic bills, but there wasn't much left over. I'd given most of my savings to my children years ago when they needed down payments on houses and help with their kids' college funds. At the time, I'd been happy to help. Now I wished I'd kept some back for myself. I started shopping carefully, buying only what I absolutely needed. But even then, I noticed how much food I was throwing away. Vegetable peels from dinner prep, bread heels that were too hard to eat, rice that had gone a bit stale. It felt wasteful, especially when I was counting every dollar. One evening, I stood at my kitchen counter looking at a pile of potato peels, carrot tops, and the tough ends of celery stalks. I'd just made soup, and this was what was left, the parts everyone throws away without thinking. But I thought about them. I thought about all the nutrients still in those scraps, about how my mother used to say that throwing away food was throwing away money. And I wondered if there was a way to use them. I started experimenting. I dried the vegetable scraps in the oven until they were crispy, then ground them into powder using an old coffee grinder I found in one of the cabinets. I did the same with bread crusts that had gone stale, with the rice that was too old to eat plain, with fish bones from the cheap fillets I bought at the market. At first, the powder was just brown dust that didn't look appetizing at all. But I kept trying. I mixed different combinations. I added salt and herbs. I adjusted the drying times and grinding methods. Slowly, over weeks of trial and error, I developed something that actually tasted good, earthy and rich, with a flavor that was hard to describe but somehow felt nourishing. I called it Nutri-Paste when I mixed it with a bit of oil and water to make a spread. It wasn't pretty, but when I ate it on toast in the mornings, I felt satisfied in a way I hadn't in months. It was food I'd created from things that were meant to be garbage. It was something useful born from waste. I made it only for myself at first. It was just a way to stretch my grocery budget and feel less guilty about throwing things away. But it became more than that. Every morning when I made my toast and spread that dark paste across it, I felt like I was doing something important. I was taking care of myself. I was being resourceful and clever and independent. Then my neighbor Joan knocked on my door. Joan was 78, a widow who lived in the cottage next to mine. She was thin in a way that worried me, all sharp bones and loose skin. Her husband had died 6 months ago, and she told me once that she'd lost her appetite after he was gone. Food tasted like nothing to her. She ate because she had to, but there was no joy in it. "I smell something interesting coming from your place," Joan said that afternoon, standing on my porch with her arms crossed against the wind. "What are you cooking?" "Nothing special," I said. "Just something I'm experimenting with. Would you like to try it?" I made Joan a piece of toast with Nutri-Paste and watched as she took a careful bite. Her expression changed, surprise, then interest, then something that looked almost like pleasure. "What is this?" she asked. "Just scraps," I told her honestly. "Vegetable peels and stale bread, and things people throw away. I grind them up and mix them together." Joan took another bite, then another. She finished the whole piece of toast, which was more than I'd seen her eat in the weeks since I'd moved in. "Can you teach me how to make it?" she asked. So I did. Joan came over the next afternoon, and we stood side by side in my small kitchen. I showed her how to save scraps in a container in the freezer, how to dry them properly so they wouldn't spoil, how to grind them into powder and store it in jars. She asked good questions and took notes in a small notebook she'd brought with her. A week later, Joan knocked on my door again. She looked different. Her cheeks had more color, and she stood a bit straighter. "I've been eating," she said simply. "Really eating, not just picking at things. Your paste, it makes food interesting again. I can taste it. I want to eat it. I don't know how to explain it, but it's brought something back to me." I felt tears prick my eyes. I'd created Nutri-Paste to help myself, to solve my own problems. I hadn't thought about what it might mean to someone else. But seeing Joan standing there, looking healthier and happier than she'd been since her husband died, I realized I'd made something more than food. I'd made hope. Word spread the way it does in small communities. Joan told her friend Margaret, who lived 2 cottages down. Margaret told her son, who told his mother-in-law. Within a month, I had people knocking on my door asking about the paste that was helping seniors eat again. I welcomed them all into my kitchen. I showed widowers who'd never learned to cook how to make something nutritious from scraps. I taught tired caregivers how to make NutriPaste for their elderly parents who'd lost interest in food. I gave recipes to frail seniors who were on fixed incomes and couldn't afford expensive supplements. My small cottage became a gathering place. People would come for lessons and stay for tea, sharing their stories while we worked together in my kitchen. They told me about their loneliness, their struggles with aging, their fears about becoming burdens to their families. And I listened because I understood. I'd been where they were, feeling useless, feeling dismissed, feeling like my best years were behind me. But making NutriPaste had shown me something important. Nothing is ever truly wasted if you know how to use it. Not vegetable scraps. Not stale bread. And not old people whose society has decided are finished. I started keeping a notebook of recipes and variations. NutriPaste with dried fish for more protein. NutriPaste with fruit peels for sweetness. NutriPaste with herbs for different flavors. Every version was made from things people threw away, transformed into something nourishing and valuable. My porch became a place where stories and gratitude mixed with the smell of whatever I was teaching that day. People brought me drawings their grandchildren had made, thanking me for making Grandma or Grandpa strong again. They brought me vegetables from their gardens and fish they'd caught, asking me to show them how to use every part. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time since Frank died, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not tucked away in a retirement home. Not visiting my children on their schedules. Not waiting quietly to fade away. I was teaching. I was helping. I was proving that an old woman could still matter, that wisdom and resourcefulness and creativity didn't disappear just because your hair turned gray. Every morning, I spread my NutriPaste on toast and looked out at the lake. I thought about that cake with its cruel message. See you later. My children had meant it as an ending, but I'd turned it into a beginning. And the beginning was just getting started. By my 3rd month in the cottage, my quiet life by the lake had transformed into something I'd never imagined. My phone, the one Sarah had bought me that I'd barely known how to use, rang constantly with people asking about NutriPaste. My email inbox, which had been empty except for spam, filled with messages from strangers telling me their stories. Joan had started a blog for me. I hadn't asked her to, but she'd insisted. People need to know about this, she'd said, sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop. You're helping people. You should help more. She'd called it Grandma's Kitchen, and she'd written about how NutriPaste had brought back her appetite after months of not caring about food. She'd included pictures of my cottage, my kitchen, and me, an old woman in an apron, smiling while stirring a pot. She'd written down some of my basic recipes and posted them for anyone to see. Within a week, the post had been shared 1,000 times. Within a month, 10,000. People from all over the state started showing up at my door. The first was a man named Robert, maybe 60 years old, who drove 3 hours from the city. He knocked on a Tuesday morning while I was having my coffee on the porch. "Are you the woman who makes the paste?" he asked, looking uncertain. "The one from the blog?" I invited him in. He told me his father was 85 and had stopped eating after Robert's mother died. The doctors said his father was depressed, that he was fading away from grief. Robert had tried everything, expensive supplements, meal services, even hiring someone to cook special meals. Nothing worked. His father would take a bite or two and push the plate away. "I don't know what else to do," Robert said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "I'm watching him die, and I can't stop it." I taught Robert how to make NutriPaste that morning. We stood side by side at my counter while I showed him the techniques I'd developed. How to dry the scraps at just the right temperature. How to grind them until they were fine, but not too fine. How to mix in just enough oil to make it spreadable without making it greasy. "It's not just about the nutrition," I told him as we worked. "It's about knowing that nothing is wasted. When your father eats this, He's eating something created from things people throw away. Things that still have value. Maybe that will mean something to him. Robert called me 2 weeks later. His father had eaten a whole meal for the first time in months. Not just nibbles, an actual meal, with a Nutri-Paste spread on bread alongside his usual food. He said it tasted real, Robert told me, his voice thick with emotion. He said it reminded him of being young, when his mother cooked with everything they had because they couldn't afford to waste anything. After Robert, there were others. So many others. A daughter drove 4 hours with her elderly mother, who'd lost her sense of taste to medication. A grandson brought his grandmother, who'd been living on Ensure shakes because solid food made her nauseous. A home health aide came asking to learn so she could help all her clients, not just one. My porch became a classroom. On good weather days, I'd teach outside, with 5 or 6 people gathered around while I demonstrated techniques. On cold or rainy days, we'd crowd into my small kitchen, taking turns at the counter. I never charged anyone. Money had never been the point. I just wanted to help. The stories people told me broke my heart and put it back together at the same time. They told me about parents who'd given up on life after losing their spouse. About grandparents who felt like burdens to their busy families. About seniors on fixed incomes who were choosing between medication and food. And they told me how Nutri-Paste had changed things. How their loved ones were eating again, gaining weight, showing interest in life. How the act of making something useful from scraps had given purpose back to people who thought they had no purpose left. Children sent me drawings. Crayon pictures of grandmas and grandpas smiling at tables full of food. Thank you notes in shaky kid handwriting that said things like, "You made Nana happy again and Grandpa eats dinner now." I kept every single one. I pinned them to my kitchen wall until there was no more space, then started putting them in albums. On hard days, when my arthritis made my hands ache or I felt tired from all the teaching, I'd look at those drawings and remember why I was doing this. One afternoon, a news reporter showed up. She was young, maybe 30, with a notebook and a friendly smile. "I'm doing a story on innovative approaches to senior nutrition," she said. "Your blog has gotten a lot of attention. Do you mind if I ask you some questions?" I almost said no. I didn't want attention or recognition. But then I thought about all the people who hadn't found my blog yet, all the seniors who were struggling alone, and I invited her in. The interview lasted 2 hours. She asked about how I'd developed Nutri-Paste, about the people I'd helped, about why I thought it worked when expensive supplements and special meals didn't. She took pictures of my kitchen, of my jars of Nutri-Paste in different varieties, of the drawings covering my walls. "Why do you think seniors respond so well to this?" she asked. I thought about it carefully. "Because it's not about being sick or old or needing special treatment," I said finally. "It's about being resourceful. It's about creating value from things others waste. When you're old, society treats you like you're wasted too. But this shows that waste is just a matter of perspective. Everything has value if you know how to use it, including us." The article came out the following week. It was titled "The Grandmother Who's Fighting Food Waste and Senior Malnutrition, One Kitchen at a Time." The picture they used showed me at my counter, surrounded by jars of Nutri-Paste, with children's drawings visible on the wall behind me. After that article, everything changed. My email inbox exploded with messages from around the country. Community centers wanted me to teach workshops. Food banks wanted to create Nutri-Paste starter kits. Healthcare workers wanted to learn so they could teach their patients. I couldn't possibly respond to everyone personally, so Joan helped me create video tutorials and post them online. We filmed in my kitchen, with me demonstrating each step while explaining why it mattered. The videos weren't fancy, just an old woman cooking, but people loved them. They said I reminded them of their own grandmothers, that my voice was calming, that watching me work made them believe they could do it too. Research organizations started reaching out. They wanted to study Nutri-Paste to understand exactly what made it effective. Was it the combination of nutrients? The digestibility of the processed scraps? The psychological impact of eating something homemade and resourceful? I let them study it. I shared all my recipes and techniques freely. I didn't want to own this. I wanted it to spread, to help as many people as possible. On a Thursday evening, 6 months after I'd moved to the cottage, I sat on my porch and looked out at the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water orange and pink. I thought about that birthday cake, about those words that had felt like dismissal. See you later. My children had meant those words to hurt, or at least to push me aside. But instead, they'd freed me. They'd freed me to become someone new, someone who mattered not because of who I used to be, but because of what I was doing right now. I was an old woman teaching the world that nothing is ever wasted, that scraps could become nourishment, that people society had written off could still create something valuable and important. For the first time in years, I felt I was exactly where I was meant to be, not tucked away quietly somewhere, not waiting for occasional visits from busy children, but here in my small cottage, with strangers at my door and purpose in my days and proof that 74 years old was not too late to matter. The phone rang on a Saturday morning in September, 8 months after I'd left my old life behind. I almost didn't answer. I'd gotten so many calls from reporters and researchers that I'd started letting most go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. Grandma? I froze. I knew that voice. Tyler, my oldest grandson. He'd be 22 now, finishing college. He'd been at that birthday party, had watched his parents present me with that cake, had stood silently while they dismissed me. Tyler, I said, my voice careful. How did you get this number? I found your blog, he said. I've been following it for months. I didn't know it was you at first. Joan doesn't use your full name. But then I saw a picture, and I recognized you. Grandma, what you're doing is amazing. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect this new life I'd built from the family that had pushed me away. But another part, the part that was still a grandmother, wanted to hear what he had to say. Your parents don't know I'm calling, Tyler continued. They don't know where you are. They think you're... I don't know what they think. They don't talk about it much. What do you want, Tyler? I want to apologize. His voice cracked. For that birthday party. For not saying anything when they gave you that cake. For being a coward. You deserved better than that, Grandma. You deserved so much better. I closed my eyes. Why are you calling now? After all this time? Because I'm studying microbiology, he said. Because of you. Because I read about what you're doing with NutriPaste, and I realized that's what I want to do with my life. Find ways to help people using science and innovation. You inspired me, Grandma. Even though I didn't deserve it, even though I stood there and let them hurt you, you inspired me. We talked for an hour. Tyler told me about his classes, about his research projects, about how he'd shown his professors my work and they'd been fascinated. He told me his parents weren't doing well. My daughter Sarah had lost her job, and my son David was going through a divorce. They ask about you sometimes, Tyler said. Mom especially. She'll say things like, I wonder where Mother is, or maybe we should try to find her. But then she doesn't do anything about it. Do you think they're sorry? I asked. Tyler was quiet for a moment. I think they're sorry things ended the way they did. I don't know if they understand why it was wrong. After we hung up, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the lake and thinking about my children. I'd been angry for months, angry at how they'd treated me, angry at being dismissed and pushed aside. But underneath the anger was hurt, the deep, aching hurt of being rejected by people you love. I didn't call them. I wasn't ready for that. But I did email Tyler and told him he could visit if he wanted to. I told him I'd teach him about NutriPaste, that I'd be happy to help with his research. He came the following weekend, driving his old car the 2 hours from campus. When I opened the door, he looked exactly like his grandfather, tall and thin, with Frank's gentle eyes. Grandma, he said, and then he was hugging me, his shoulders shaking. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I held him while he cried. My angry, hurt heart softened a bit. Tyler wasn't responsible for his parents' choices. He'd been caught in the middle, just a kid trying to navigate a complicated situation. We spent the weekend in my kitchen. I showed him everything, my techniques, my recipes, the science behind why certain combinations worked. He took pages of notes and asked smart questions. He told me about nutrition studies and bacterial fermentation and things I didn't fully understand but found fascinating anyway. You know what's brilliant about this? He said Sunday afternoon. You've essentially created a probiotic superfood from waste products. The fermentation process, when you dry the scraps at low temperatures, creates beneficial bacteria. The combination of nutrients is perfectly balanced for senior digestion. And the cost is almost nothing. Grandma, this could change everything for elderly nutrition. I smiled. I just wanted to help people eat. You did so much more than that. Before Tyler left, he asked if he could tell his mother where I was. I thought about it for a long time. Tell her she can write to me if she wants to, I said finally. But I'm not promising anything. I'm not ready to just forgive and forget. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. Not an email, an actual handwritten letter, the kind Sarah hadn't written since she was a child. Dear Mom, it started. The letter was 5 pages long. Sarah wrote about the birthday party, about how it had seemed like a good idea at the time, how she and David had convinced themselves they were being practical. She wrote about the months after I disappeared, how they'd panicked when they couldn't find me, how they'd filed a missing persons report until Tyler told them I'd left on purpose. We were scared, she wrote. Scared of you getting older, scared of losing you the way we lost Dad, scared of having to watch you fade away. So we pushed you away first, told ourselves you'd be better off somewhere else. It was selfish and cruel, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. She wrote about her job loss, about feeling like a failure, about understanding now what it felt like to be dismissed and undervalued. She wrote about reading my blog and seeing the drawings on my wall and realizing that I'd built a whole new life without them. You don't need us, she wrote. Maybe you never did. But I need you. Not to take care of me or fix my problems. I need to learn from you. I need to understand how you turned that awful birthday into something beautiful. I need to know how to be strong the way you're strong. I read that letter 3 times. Then I called Sarah. Come visit, I said when she answered. Not to fix anything. Not to make it all better. Just to talk. She came the following Saturday. She looked older than I remembered, tired lines around her eyes, gray showing in her dark hair. We sat at my kitchen table like strangers, both of us uncertain how to begin. This is a nice place, she said finally. It suits me. I read your blog. All of it. What you're doing is incredible, Mom. Thank you. We sat in awkward silence. Then Sarah started crying. I'm so ashamed, she said. Of that cake, of pushing you away, of not understanding what we were doing to you. You deserved better. You deserved children who valued you instead of treating you like a burden. Yes, I said simply. I did. Can you forgive me? I thought about it honestly. I don't know yet. Right now, I can accept your apology. Forgiveness might come later. Or it might not. Either way, I'm okay. We talked for hours that day. Not like mother and daughter. We weren't ready for that yet. But like 2 people trying to understand each other, trying to find a way forward that didn't erase the past but didn't stay stuck in it either. Sarah didn't ask to move closer. She didn't try to insert herself into my new life. She just listened while I told her about NutriPaste, about the people I'd helped, about this new purpose I'd found. I'm proud of you, Mom, she said before she left. I know I don't have the right to be, but I am. After she drove away, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset. Closure had come. Not soft and comfortable, but honest and real. My relationship with my children might never be what it was before that birthday. But maybe it could be something new, something built on mutual respect instead of obligation. I'd left my old life to prove that endings could become beginnings. Maybe the same was true for relationships. Maybe my children and I could begin again, not as the people we'd been, but as the people we'd become. Or maybe not. And that would be okay too. Because I'd learned something important in my cottage by the lake. I didn't need their approval or their presence to matter. I mattered because of what I was doing, because of the people I was helping, because I'd chosen to keep living with purpose instead of fading away quietly. See you later, that cake had said. They'd meant it as an ending. But I'd turned it into a beginning. And the beginning was still unfolding, full of possibilities I'd never imagined when I'd walked away from that birthday party with hurt and anger in my heart. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in November. The subject line read, "Inquiry from State Health Department," and I almost deleted it as spam. But something made me open it. Dear Mrs. Morrison, it began. We have been following your work with NutriPaste and its impact on senior nutrition. We would like to discuss the possibility of including your methods in our state senior nutrition program. Would you be available for a meeting? I read the email 3 times, then called Joan to make sure I wasn't imagining things. This is real, she said after reading it over my shoulder. The state government wants to work with you. Do you understand how big this is? I didn't, not really. I was just an old woman in a cottage making paste from scraps. But I replied to the email and agreed to meet. 2 weeks later, 3 people in suits sat in my small living room, looking somewhat out of place among my simple furniture and the children's drawings still covering my walls. They introduced themselves: Dr. Patricia Chun from the Health Department, Marcus Williams from Social Services, and Jennifer Lopez from the Governor's Office on Aging. We've been studying the reports coming from communities where people are using your NutriPaste, Dr. Chun said, opening a folder full of papers. The results are remarkable. Seniors who've been struggling with malnutrition are gaining weight. Hospital admissions for malnutrition-related issues are down in areas where NutriPaste has spread. And the cost savings are significant. She showed me charts and graphs that I barely understood. But the basic message was clear. My paste from scraps was actually working on a bigger scale than I'd realized. We want to create a pilot program, Marcus Williams explained. We teach your methods in community centers across the state. We'd provide starter kits to food banks and senior centers. We'd train healthcare workers to recommend it to their patients. But we need your permission, Jennifer Lopez added. And your help. We can't do this without you. I sat there in my old chair, the one that had been Frank's favorite, and tried to process what they were telling me. My little kitchen experiment, born from loneliness and necessity, had become something that government officials wanted to spread across the entire state. I don't want money, I said finally. That's not what this is about. We understand, Dr. Chun said. But we do need you to help train people, to verify that they're teaching your methods correctly, to be the face of the program if you're willing. I thought about all the people who'd come to my door over the past year. All the stories of grandparents eating again, of families finding hope, of seniors feeling useful and valued. If I could help more people, thousands more, how could I say no? I'll do it, I said. But on one condition. This has to stay simple. No fancy packaging, no expensive equipment. If regular people can't do this in their own kitchens with what they already have, then we've missed the point. They agreed. Over the next 6 months, I became busier than I'd been in my entire life. I traveled to community centers across the state, teaching workshops to dozens of people at a time. I trained healthcare workers and nutritionists, showing them not just how to make NutriPaste, but how to talk to seniors about it, how to make it feel empowering instead of like medicine. The food banks loved it. They started giving out starter kits, a simple jar, basic instructions, and a list of what scraps to save. People on tight budgets could make nutritious food from things they would have thrown away anyway. The cost was almost nothing, but the impact was everything. Joan came with me to most of the workshops, helping manage the crowds and answer questions. She'd become my unofficial assistant, and I couldn't have done any of it without her. She was stronger now, healthier, more alive than she'd been when I first met her. NutriPaste had given her back her appetite, and helping me spread it had given her back her purpose. The news coverage grew. Local stations did stories. National health magazines wrote articles. I did interviews from my kitchen, always with those children's drawings visible in the background because I wanted people to remember what this was really about, not science or programs, but real people getting their lives back. One article called me the grandmother who started a movement. I laughed when I read that. I wasn't trying to start a movement. I was just trying to help people eat. But it was a movement, whether I'd intended it or not. Community gardens started collecting scraps for seniors who didn't cook much themselves. Churches organized NutriPaste making groups where elderly members could socialize while preparing their weekly supply. Schools taught it in home economics classes, with students making batches to donate to local senior centers. The health department tracked the results carefully. 6 months into the pilot program, they had hard data. Hospital admissions for malnutrition among seniors were down 23% in areas where NutriPaste had been introduced. Emergency room visits were down. The cost savings to the healthcare system were in the millions. But more important than the numbers were the stories. I received letters and emails every single day from people telling me how NutriPaste had changed their lives, or their parents' lives, or their grandparents' lives. A man wrote to tell me his 90-year-old mother had been refusing to eat for months, growing weaker and weaker. She'd tried NutriPaste and said it reminded her of growing up during the Depression, when her mother made everything from scratch and nothing went to waste. She started eating again, started telling stories about her childhood, started engaging with life again. A woman told me about her father, a widower who'd lost all interest in cooking or eating after his wife died. Making NutriPaste had given him a project, something to do with his hands and his time. He'd started a blog of his own, sharing variations and recipes, connecting with other seniors online. Food had brought him back to the world. These stories filled me up in a way nothing else could. Every letter, every email, every person who came up to me after workshop to say thank you reminded me why I was doing this. Tyler visited often, bringing his research and his questions. He was writing his thesis on NutriPaste, studying the exact nutritional composition and how it affected senior health markers. He wanted to understand the science behind why it worked so well. It's not just the nutrition, I told him during one of his visits. It's the act of making it. It's feeling useful. It's creating value from waste. When seniors make NutriPaste, they're not just feeding themselves, they're proving they still matter. He wrote that down in his notebook, then looked up at me with Frank's gentle eyes. You know what you've really done, Grandma? You've given people back their dignity. That's more powerful than any supplement or medication. By the time spring arrived, 14 months after I'd moved to the cottage, the state program was in full swing. NutriPaste was being made in hundreds of senior centers. Food banks were distributing thousands of starter kits. Healthcare providers were recommending it to their elderly patients. Other states started reaching out, wanting to implement similar programs. Canada asked for permission to adapt my methods. A group in Japan wanted to study how NutriPaste might work with traditional Japanese scraps and ingredients. I said yes to all of it. I shared everything freely, all my recipes, all my techniques, all the knowledge I'd gained through trial and error. I didn't want to own this. I wanted it to spread as far as it could go, to help as many people as possible. One evening, I sat on my porch with Joan, both of us tired from a long day of teaching. The lake was calm, reflecting the sunset in perfect stillness. Did you ever imagine this when you started? Joan asked. When you were just experimenting in your kitchen? No, I admitted. I was just trying to feed myself and not feel so useless. I never thought it would become this. You've changed lives, Joan said. Thousands of lives. Maybe millions, eventually. I thought about that. Thought about that birthday cake with its cruel message. Thought about my children dismissing me as finished, used up, done. Thought about walking away from that life and finding this one. I didn't do it alone, I said. You helped. Tyler helped. All the people who believed in this and spread the word, they helped. This isn't just me. This is what happens when people stop throwing things away and start seeing value in what others overlook. Still, Joan said, squeezing my hand, you started it. You took scraps and made something beautiful. You took rejection and made it into purpose. That's all you, my friend. I smiled, watching the sun sink behind the trees. From scraps to treasure. From silence to movement. From dismissed to indispensable. All because I'd refused to accept that 74 years old meant I was finished. The more I gave away, my recipes, my time, my knowledge, the richer my days became. Not rich in money or possessions, but rich in purpose and connection and meaning. Rich in the knowledge that I mattered, that my life had value, that age was just a number and usefulness had no expiration date. I never asked for fame or recognition. I never wanted my name in headlines or my face on magazine covers. All I wanted was to show that life could begin again, even at 74. That endings could become beginnings if you were brave enough to walk through the door. And I'd proven it. Not just for myself, but for thousands of others who'd been told they were too old, too late, too finished. We'd all proven it together, one jar of Nutri-Paste at a time. I'm 77 now. 3 years have passed since that birthday cake changed my life, and sometimes I can barely remember the woman I was before. The woman who felt useless, who accepted being pushed aside, who believed her children when they told her she was finished. That woman is gone. In her place is someone I'm still getting to know, someone stronger and more confident than I ever imagined I could be. My hair is completely white now, and my hands are more wrinkled than ever. Arthritis makes my fingers ache on cold mornings, and I move slower than I used to. But I've never felt more alive, more purposeful, more certain that I matter. The cottage by the lake is still my home, though it looks different now. The paint is fresh, the garden is flourishing, and I've added a small greenhouse where I dry scraps year-round. My kitchen has been featured in magazines and on television shows. People recognize me when I go to the market in town. But the biggest change is inside me. I wake up every morning knowing that my day will have meaning. There are workshops to teach, emails to answer, people to help. My calendar is fuller now than it ever was when I was younger, and I love every busy, exhausting minute of it. Nutri-Paste has spread further than I ever dreamed possible. 43 states now have programs based on my methods. Canada, Japan, Australia, and several European countries have adapted it for their own elderly populations. The United Nations asked me to speak at a conference on food security and senior nutrition. Me, a 77-year-old grandmother who just wanted to stop wasting food. I still do all my workshops myself when I can, though Joan and Tyler and a growing team of volunteers help when the demand is too high. I insist on meeting people face-to-face whenever possible, because I remember how much it meant when someone took the time to teach me something, to make me feel valued, to show me I still had something to contribute. Every workshop is full of people who remind me of myself 3 years ago. Seniors who've been told they're finished. Widows and widowers who've lost their purpose along with their spouse. People on fixed incomes who are choosing between food and medication. Families desperate to help elderly parents who've stopped eating. I look at their faces, and I see myself on that 74th birthday, staring at a cake that told me I was done. And I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You're not finished. Your best days might still be ahead of you. Age is not an ending, it's a doorway, and you get to choose whether to walk through it. My relationship with my children is still complicated. Sarah visits every few months now, and we talk on the phone every week. She's found a new job and seems happier, more settled. David has reached out a few times, awkward and apologetic. We're rebuilding slowly, carefully, without expectations. I've forgiven them, mostly. Not because they deserved it, but because holding on to anger was taking up space I needed for better things. We'll never have the relationship we had before that birthday. Too much has happened, too much has changed. But we're finding something new. A relationship between adults who respect each other, rather than a mother who needs and children who resent. Tyler is finishing his doctorate now. His research on Nutri-Paste has been published in medical journals and nutrition magazines. He wants to work for the World Health Organization, developing nutrition programs for elderly populations in developing countries. I'm so proud of him, I could burst. Joan is still my closest friend and companion. She lives next door, and we spend most days together, teaching workshops or just sitting on my porch watching the lake. She's writing a book about Nutri-Paste, about me, about this whole unlikely journey. I told her I didn't need a book about me, but she just laughed and said it wasn't really about me. It was about what's possible when we stop throwing things away. Last week, on my 77th birthday, I woke up to find my porch full of people. Joan had organized it without telling me. Dozens of people I'd taught over the past 3 years, all gathered to celebrate. They brought homemade cards and drawings from grandchildren. They brought jars of Nutri-Paste they'd made themselves, proud to show me their variations and improvements. And they brought a cake. This one said, "Happy birthday to our inspiration," in beautiful frosting letters. We ate it together on my porch, all of us, talking and laughing and sharing stories about how our lives had changed. I thought about that other cake 3 years ago. "See you later," it had said. My children had meant those words as dismissal, as the end of my useful life. But they'd been right in a way they never intended. I had said, "See you later," to that old version of myself. The version who accepted being pushed aside, who believed she was used up, who was waiting quietly to fade away. I'd said goodbye to weakness and hello to strength. I'd said goodbye to purposelessness and hello to meaning. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who matters. Not because of what I used to be or who I used to know, but because of what I'm doing right now, today at 77 years old. I see white hair and wrinkled skin and age spots on my hands. I see arthritis in my knuckles and reading glasses on a chain around my neck. I see all the markers of being old that society tells us means being finished. But I also see strong shoulders and capable hands and eyes that are still bright with purpose. I see someone who takes scraps and makes treasure, who takes rejection and makes revolution, who takes endings and makes beginnings. My story is proof that age is not an ending. It's a doorway to something new, something you might never have discovered if life hadn't pushed you through it. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing, not because it didn't hurt, but because of who you become while healing from it. If you're reading this and you've been told you're too old, too late, too small to matter, remember this. I was 74 when my life really began. I was dismissed, pushed aside, written off as finished. And I took that rejection and turned it into purpose. You can too. It doesn't matter if you're 60 or 70 or 80 or 90. It doesn't matter if your children have stopped calling or your friends have moved away or society has decided you're invisible. You're not finished. You're not used up. You're not waste. You're just getting started. Take your scraps, whatever they are, whatever you think is worthless about your life or yourself, and make something beautiful from them. Take the parts everyone else throws away and prove they have value. Take your age and your experience and your hard-won wisdom and show the world what those things are really worth. 3 years ago, I walked away from a birthday party that told me I was done. Today, I'm teaching thousands of people that nothing is ever really wasted. Not food scraps. Not time. Not old people who society has decided are finished. Everything has value if you know where to look for it. Including you. Especially you. So if someone gives you a cake that says, "See you later," take it as an invitation. Say goodbye to the person you thought you had to be, and hello to the person you're becoming. Walk through that doorway into something new. Your next chapter is waiting. And it might just be your best one yet. I'm 77 years old, with white hair and wrinkled hands and more purpose than I've ever had in my life. I matter. Not despite my age, but because of everything my age has taught me. And so do you. Remember that. Hold on to it. Live it. Because endings are just beginnings in disguise, and you're not finished until you decide you are. I decided I wasn't finished at 74. And look what happened. What will happen when you make the same choice?